Hello everyone, welcome to a session from the Nordic region. The summer is great, it's hot in the studio where I'm standing right now, and I'm looking forward to talk to you about the experiences that I personally had with DORA implementations in the Nordic region. And just a short introduction to who I am. My name is Jakob Seierø. I'm from Denmark, if you can't recognize that from the accent. I'm the founder of a company called Cybersecurity Innovation. I'm a podcast host at CyberSundhed, a Danish podcast. And recently we started a cyber education project here in Denmark as well. So a bit of different things that I'm working with. But today it's going to be about DORA. And I guess we need just to make sure that we are on the same page. So I'm just going to talk a bit about what DORA is and why do we need it. Then there is a subject that I like to talk a lot about, which is compliance, which I believe is one of the most sexy things that we have out there. Some like maturity, that's good as well. But let's have a look at those two different areas and compare them and what is important when it comes to DORA in the financial sector. And for many people, this is a huge task to engage in. So how to eat an elephant called DORA. And that's obviously one piece by piece, or one paragraph and one paragraph. And the normal question or the answer to anything, if you're a so-called expert or consultant, it all depends. So let's get into that later on with questions. You're more than welcome to ask questions in the chat. And one of the things that it all depends on is who you are. I don't know who you are and who's out there behind the camera. But so what I'm saying is that if you have a question, please just state just briefly the role that you're in, whether you're a CISO or you're in risk management, if you're in compliance, wherever you're placed, because it all depends. So finally, I'm going to do some key takeaways, some simple points at the end of it, because there's a lot of things that we could talk about. But from my experience, I have at least one key takeaway that I will get back to. It's going to be around 30 minutes. And at the end, we're going to, as we said, have some questions. But feel free to ask already in the chat if you want to. So what is DORA and why do we need it? Well, this is called the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and it's a new regulation. And this is going to apply for all of us at the 17th of January 2025. And we all know probably that there's a huge problem with cybersecurity attacks, and we know that IT security is important. We also know that we need to take care of what is important in the society. And we have finance. Finance is driving more or less everything in the world today. So we need to protect our banks, our insurance companies, investment firms. So we insure the financial sector basically in Europe. We need to stay resilient in the event of a severe operational disruption. I would say that DORA for many people is expanding IT security not only to be about cyber threats, but also about operational stability. So that is one of the most important points. But we need this because we're depending so much on anything that is economically based. So this is why we need it. And of course, we see a lot of threats all the time escalating. Now we're just going to regulate about it. So in short, we had GDPR to protect humans and individuals. Now we have DORA that's going to protect the way that we use our financial institutions in EU. So welcome to DORA. We love it. So what does it cover? This could take forever to go through, but I want to headline it just quickly. Also, because I think it's one of the most important points ever. It is to take a look at these articles, not only just briefly look through them, but basically read them. If you know about this or have tried it before, you know there are some general provisions in the beginning. Read those to understand the definitions and get through that. and figure out if it's relevant for you as a company, of course. It's stated all there and why we need it. So ICT risk management, the first section, Article 5 till 16, it's everything that you've always done in the financial sector. You've always made risk-based decisions, and therefore, this is one of the most important things you need to start with. ICT-related incident management, classification, and reporting, just as well as we know it from GDPR, we need to get in control of our incidents if they happen, and we need to classify them, and we need to report them to the right authorities. Then you have the digital operational resilience testing part. This one, if some of you know a bit about cyber, for example, when it comes to testing, this is, let's call it a cyber, it's a broader version of it, but it's less cyber oriented as it is with cyber. But the point is, this is a structured way of doing testing in the financial sector and now by law. Managing ICT third-party risk, well, the world has changed. So we have the paradigm shift of everybody sitting down and writing their requirements to the third-party vendors and saying, we need you to do this, and you have to do this because I'm the client and you are the provider. So the world has changed. Now we have third-party outsourcing partners like Microsoft, Google, etc. And when you think about those, you cannot go to these companies anymore and say, you need to do as we want you to do and keep our data in the way that we want you to do, but you have to sign the terms and conditions, and then you accept the way that they do it. So that's one of the most important things in that sense. It's very much like the outsourcing bekendtgørelsen, as it's called in Denmark. Information sharing, this is a good one. It's something that has been needed for many years, sharing information between different financial institutions, between entities. That's a good thing, but how do you do it to keep confidentiality, etc. Fortunately, this is the Nordic region, so I'm not a big, I'm not selling anything here, but I know that NFSAT is doing a great job. So if you look at what they've done and look into that, then you can get a long way with what you need. Competent authorities, the Finanstilsynet, so that's the last part. Not so much of importance for you joining, probably. I don't know. There might be some from that way around as well, but I'm not speaking to you guys. You know more about that one than I do. Delegated acts, that's an interesting one. I'll get back to it. So that's DORA in a nutshell in 5 minutes. I have made these overall views in it as well, just to say that principles and requirements in ICT risk management framework, that's the ICT risk management, the articles from before. Then you have your pillar with ICT related incidents, the general requirements, and also how you report on that one. The third-party risk management, already talked about it. This is just a visual on the same things before, but key contractual provisions, look at your contracts, information sharing, cyber intelligence on cyber threats, the digital operational resilience testing, basic and advanced testings, pen test, etc. And then the oversight framework for critical ICT party providers, IT third-party providers, sorry. Yeah. So I only have 30 minutes, but that was the overview. I hope we're on the same page. What I want to talk about is the discussion about compliance versus maturity and the discussions that I see in the places that I have been, both now, but also earlier. And it's quite simple with compliance. It's not something that you can go and discuss. You can't mitigate it. You can't. I had a saying where he said, well, if you talk about security, we have a mitigation for that. So you can always mitigate security. You can never discuss things like compliance. Either you're compliant or you're not. It's that simple. So when we keep that in mind, then when you look at things, either you do it or you don't. So I know that you will be sitting out there and saying, well, but you can interpret and so on and so on. That's correct. But either you're compliant or you're not. So it's a bit of binary things to look at it from that point of view. Think of that when you do your stuff. Either you're compliant or you're not. So if you say you're compliant, then the next thing is then prove it, right? So documentation and evidence is key. So if you say, well, I've interpreted like this and so on, because you argue that it's a thing you can interpret, then okay, fine, but then show me the documentation and the evidence. So while you go about working with DORA, be aware that if you believe you're compliant and it's not arguable, then be ready to show the documentation and the evidence. It's key. It doesn't matter how much you talk, you need to show what you're doing. One thing as well, when it comes to compliance, it's really difficult sometimes to figure out who makes the decisions, who has the responsibility and accountability. We all know that the board of directors has the final accountability, no doubt about it. But the question is the responsibility and the delegation of this accountability. How do you go from your strategy to your policies, to your procedures? And who has then the decisions to say, well, I need to have this written in my policy to support the requirements. I need to have this procedure to support the things that I'm responsible for. My experience is that if you have shared decision-making and shared responsibilities, go together, sit together. I'm coming back to that. But sitting by yourself as a CISO or as a risk officer or compliance officer and sitting in your own little area and saying, this is what I believe I am responsible for and can make decisions about. That's not the way to do it. Go together, agree on what you do, make the decisions together and document the decisions that you have made. That's definitely the way to go. It has always been like that. So, non-compliant, then what? That's a really good question. I won't speculate on what happens when we get a visit from Finanstilsynet or the different authorities. Nobody knows. They can speculate. But I do know that if you are non-compliant, then you get a fine. So you can choose not to be compliant, and you can maybe even have a strategy or a risk tolerance saying that, well, we allow certain compliance issues that we can live with for, let's say, some time, because that's part of our incident process. If we have something that is non-compliant, we have to deal with it. Then you raise an incident, you handle it like that. That could be one way of handling non-compliant issues. So I had a funny one there. How do you document that you're non-compliant? You sit down, you write, you say, well, this part of the law I will not adhere to. You obviously cannot do that in the Nordic. I know that some people in Italy, they wrote down that, well, let's just put it in the contract. We are somewhat adhering to the law. Can't do that. So if you're not compliant, what happens? You do something about it. You create incidents about it in your own system. And if you're non-compliant when the authorities come, you handle it at that point in time. But I would say the chance of not being compliant, if you have your documentation and evidence in place and you have documented your decisions you've done through the whole process, you're a good place to go. Everything else after the 17th of January is speculations until now. You could also write Finanstilsynet and get what you call aktindsigt and ask for their plan on how they are going to do this. And maybe they have a plan, maybe they don't. But you can do that as well to get more knowledge on that one. So when it comes to experience working with DORA, again, everybody starts out with a gap analysis, and that's a really good starting point. Because then you get an idea on where you are. You do your control questions, you do your normal gap analysis, and you get a pretty good sense or idea on how far you are. I guess most of you that are listening in already have done something like that. And you can use the CMMC model to measure how mature you are. 0 to 5 is the normal one. And you can use that to figure out where to improve, but just it's not compliant, it's maturity. So I'll get back to that in a few seconds. The reason why I think a gap analysis is a good starting point, of course, is to get a good overview but also a good way to figure out how do we improve. So when we operationalize these things you have to do, then you do it in a mature way and you do it in a good way. Because if you do these things and you are, let's say, on a 1 on your maturity scale, it's going to be a huge operational challenge for everyone that needs to do the work while this is moving into operations. So use the gap assessments and the measurements for that to improve your operational work. So finally, very simple, compliance do not care about maturity. So either you do it or you don't. As long as you've documented it, it might be a handheld process that you do everything in the right way, your risk assessments, your risk identification, your risk treatment, etc., etc. How mature it is doesn't really matter. Either you're compliant or you're not. So documentation and evidence are more important than operational challenges. I know that operations don't like that, and of course no one does, because this is a huge amount of work we need to do, but focus more on documentation and evidence, and then focus on the maturity later. The deadline is on the 17th of January, so the advice is focus on compliance before the 17th of January and maturity after the 17th of January 2005. Yeah. So how do we start with DORA? Many ideas, I guess, out there people have, but in a nutshell, we still have these 45 articles plus the 57, and maybe not so much on the 1 till 4, but at least from 5 till, let's say, 45, you have work to do. The first ones, read them. The last ones, 57, I'm gonna get back to that because that's kind of an bonus elephant, or let's say the delegated elephants are partly here, which is the challenge. And this is for everyone a huge challenge, because these RTSs, as they are called, that we have in the delegated acts, some of them are very, very long, and some of them are not done. So how do we handle those? I would say that the ones that are done, take a look at those, and look at those that you believe are most important. I would say what I've figured out here and experienced in my work is that if you take a look at these RTSs, these regulatory standards, then you could, if you know, compare them to, let's say, ISO 27000, and also some of the CIS 18 controls, but they're very specific. And well, if you take a look at them and you know about ISO, you will see that they're comparable. When it comes to looking into these, then I think that these are not the first one you should focus on, but there is an elephant to be eaten here as well. Some are done. Take a look at those that are done and start with those, and I'll get back to which one to start with. So it's basically as simple as starting from the top. It should have said from and not form the top. Sorry for that one. But anyways, this is what I recommend doing. Read and understand the articles 1 till 5. Read and understand what it says, because you need to understand the definitions, you need to understand the wording, no doubt about it. And also think about how the wording is in the translated articles into your own policies and your procedures, etc., depending on what you work in. But figure out, what does a policy mean? What does a procedure mean in your own organization? So understand these definitions, and that will do the work, that will make the work easier. When it comes to governance and risk, this is where we always start. I just mentioned ISO, and in any case, you always want to figure out who's accountable, who has the responsibility, who does what, coming back to who you are, and so on and so on. So figure out, step number 1 is governance. It's Article 5 in ICT risk management section, and then Article 6, that's about risk, ICT risk. So start from the top, start with these ones. They will help you in the rest of the articles as well, because they will set the scene for risk tolerance, it will set the scene on who has to do what, etc. Incident management, take that as step 2, and then you can see that I've written step 3, 4, 5, etc. But it depends. If you have the resources for it, there's no need not to start with these in parallel, but start with Article 5 till 16, and then if you're able to do it, then go through the rest of them in parallel. But if you do not have the resources, I recommend it take it from the top. Yeah, that's it. So let's finish one article. So how would you go about implementing one article? This is a simple approach, I guess. Say, well, I start from the top. I take one article at a time. How do we do that? The prerequisites for what I'm talking about here is that you've done a gap analysis already. I think a lot of you have done that. Otherwise, I guess you're in a hurry to reach the 17th of January. The way that I work with workshops, the way that I do this is we talk with the people that are responsible. We invite these people to the workshops that we held. If you start with governance, it's a good place because then you can gather everyone there and start with those clearing out those decisions, who are responsible for what. Document those decisions so that we agree that I'm responsible for this and you are for that. You might have these documents already in place, your governance documents, your ISMS systems, etc. But still go into it and make sure that you document that who is responsible for what in this specific article. Then you can break down the article into the different paragraphs. You can review, when you do that, then you can start reviewing your governance documents, like your own policies, guidelines, and SOPs. See how they match the wording from the different articles and see, okay, do I need to add stuff into my own policies or my guidelines, etc., and take them like that. When you've done that, review the supporting system. So if you're using some kind of system or tooling to support you in your risk management or any of the other articles, have a look at those systems and those toolings. When you think about the new things that you have to do, go in, test the new governance documents, go through the new processes, the new SOPs, and also while you do that, make sure that the system supports it. And very, very important, when you do it, start documenting and gathering evidence that I have updated my policy, I have already done this in the system, etc. So do this step by step, gather the evidence, collect it, and make it ready for if when you get a visit from the authorities. Finally, hand over to operations. Do that kindly. It's a huge task, and then think about how you can mature those processes and the things that you're working with there. Start thinking about hiring people to do this. So it all depends, and it all depends on what you need to do depending on who you are. Not all articles are relevant for everyone. So what I've done here is that just a quick one on the roles that we have in the financial sector. You know the defense lines, so the 3 lines of defense. And based on that, there are different things that you need to do and what you should focus on. What I've done here is that I've listed information security, technology, risk, procurement, legal, compliance, internal audit, and the board members. The numbers that you see there are representing what I believe and experience when I'm working with the financial sector is that, well, technology, legal, and procurement, those are definitely in the first line of defense. There are sometimes some challenges with the CISO and with risk, because that in some case you are the ones responsible for executing, let's say, the risk assessments. So you do that, but at the same time you might also be responsible for the controlling of that we are using the right guidelines and procedures, so you belong in second line of defense. So be aware of that. I guess if you're sitting out there and you're a CISO or you're a risk officer, you've tried this, you probably have experienced this as well. Think about who you are and in which defense lines you have your responsibility. Based on that, you need to go back to the articles and think about your responsibility, which ones are relevant for you, depending on where you are. You, of course, have internal audit and the board members. So board members is the final line of defense, just the 4 here. I wonder if somebody's going to comment on that one, but that's interesting. Anyways, it all depends on who you are and which defense line you're in, which articles you should focus on. In the end of the session here, I have the Q&A, and if you have a question you're sitting in either of these situations, you have these roles. If you have any questions, please just state that you are in that role and state your question. Then I can answer as the best I can. I have been speaking with these different types of people for many years, so I will do my best to answer your question. Key takeaways. So we're 5 minutes left, I can see. So the key takeaways, if you only do one thing, do this. Read the articles, as simple as that. Just read the law. Read the articles from the top. While you read it, think about who you are and know your accountability and your responsibility. So in Denmark, we only have ansvar in this one, but you could argue that somebody would be ansvarlig and somebody would be udførende. So many things are said about that one for many years. Anyways, read the articles from the top. That's, if you do one thing, read it. And if you haven't done it, read it. If you have done it, read it again. It's so important to understand that one. Secondly and thirdly, prioritize your articles from the top. So read those. I know not all legal people will say this is true, but some say that the first one is the most important. Everything is important. I know that, but just think about it. Start from the top. And then when you do this, start with implementing one article fully. So go through the whole process of speaking to all the people involved, take all the steps, document, gather evidence, update, make sure that you gather the evidence, do your screenshots, and make sure you hand it over to operational and you have people to hand it over. Do that with one article at a time. Start from the top, finish one. And finally, as I said, everything else you will learn by doing. That's fair. We haven't done this before. It's new. But finally, document your decisions. So if you decide not to do something, document it. Gather the evidence so you can show if you've decided that you want to do this. Gather the evidence and say, this is something that I've done. I can show you the evidence. And finally, the good thing about compliance is that you are making the world a better place. So let's take care of the world and people's money and have fun while doing it. That's the final words from me. So let's see if there's any questions out there. Okay, so thank you for the questions. I'm looking at them right now. I will read them out loud so you can hear the questions as well. What risks have you identified in relation to DORA implementation, and how are you addressing them? Okay, so what risks have you identified in relation to DORA implementation, and how are you addressing them? Okay, so again, this it all depends. There are compliance risks, there are information security risks, and there are project risks. So when you do this from a project point of view, there's anyways, the short answer is, if I identify a risk, I write it down, I document that I have this risk, I just basically write it down in an Excel sheet. You can do that from the beginning. If you have a tool at the customer, use that one. Maybe those tools are not updated and ready to handle all risks, but write them down. And if you haven't done it already, then figure out who's responsible for the risk. So one of the risks that I have identified, which is the one that I see almost everywhere, is that people do not know their responsibility or accountability. So if you really dig into risk management, which is Article 6, you'll figure out pretty soon that, okay, before I can do risk management really good, I need to understand the risk ownership and the risk partners and the different people involved in handling those risks. So the first thing that I do is make sure that we get in control of who is responsible and make sure that they sign off that, yes, I agree that I have this responsibility. Yes, responsibility is a risk. Figure that out together with everyone and get that in place. That's one. Have you been Have there been any notable legal changes or consideration that organizations should be aware of in DORA implementation? Have there been any notable legal challenges or considerations that organizations should be aware of in DORA? I think that notable legal challenges, I think the pure amount of the legal requirements is going to be a challenge. I think that the whole thing that you have your RTSs and all the underlying delegated acts is a notable legal challenge for everyone to handle. I know that legal, if you work in a legal department, that the whole contractual part of looking into the controls and every point in the RTS for ICT, the third-party risk management, it's huge. So if you are sitting in legal, dig in and start with that if you're a legal in that department. CISO, what are the most critical assets we need to protect? It all depends, but the critical assets we need to protect is related to the crown jewels. So okay. What are the most critical assets we need to protect? You need to protect the assets that are related to your crown jewels, the business processes. So this is about asking the right question, then also to your business, doing business impact analysis, doing business continuity planning, etc. But the most critical assets are definitely the ones that are supporting your business critical processes. So what are the most critical assets we need to protect? You could take it to, I can give you an example from IT because that's pretty obvious for many people, that if you look at the critical assets in the infrastructure, not from a business perspective, but when you do your assessment whether an asset is critical or not, well, from a business point of view, do your business impact analysis. If you go into the infrastructure, I'm pretty sure that most people will say one or two things that are most critical assets in IT. One is your AD and one is your network. So those two are definitely critical ICT assets. When it comes to the critical assets of the business, it depends on your business processes and your underlying assets that you have there. So assets is a wide term. If I have ISO 27001 and SOC 2 type, how far am I from DORA compliance? Do I need to implement something additional still? Okay, so the question is, Jakob, do you know ISO 27001 and 22301 and SOC 2 type 2 and DORA? I would say that, as I recommended, read the articles. So if you read the articles, you will be able to see what you're missing. So start from the top, read the articles and see. If you remember all your ISO requirements and your SOC 2 type 2, you will, that's the beauty of this one. If you actually done these things, then you're on your way, on a good way, and you will recognize it. So when you read the articles from the top, you'll start right away saying, well, this is what I have in my ISO 27000. This is what I have in my SOC 2 type 2. So do that and you'll get a long way. I definitely believe that there are some things that you haven't done. Let's say, for example, Tiber. I don't think that on any of these things that you have specific things around security testing. So you should probably do more on that part when I look at this. Yeah, that's my answer on that one. 5, can you share some of the best practice or lessons learned from implementing DORA compliance in your cybersecurity operations? Best practice or lessons learned from the implementation? Well, I think I've done that, but if I should pick out anything else, the best practice is that you need to document things, no doubt about it. And the lessons learned is that depending on which area you live in the financial sector, if you're in pension or you're in banking or you're in insurance, you have more or less good experience with the documentation that you do and gathering evidence. So I would say that start really early with gathering evidence. Think about how the end result will be. So play around with the idea that you will be standing in front of a auditor and they will ask you, okay, so yes, I do have these. You will answer. They will ask you, how do you look at your concentration risk with your third-party vendors, for example? Well, we have some good and nice processes around how we evaluate that. Cool. Show me those and show me the evidence. So when you do your implementation, start thinking about the evidence early in the process. So that's definitely one thing that I would recommend in your cybersecurity operations. Yeah, so if it's from cybersecurity operations point of view, it all depends. Maybe that was a bad example, but from a cybersecurity operations, if you want to make sure that you can handle incidents, for example, make sure that you document your use cases in your CM solution and be able to show those as soon as possible. Make sure, related to the other question you had before about critical assets, what are the most critical assets? Well, figure out which assets you have that are critical for the business. Figure out which assets those are in the infrastructure. Make sure that you then do a use case in your CM solution for that specific asset, so you can do the mapping from top till bottom, from business critical assets to cybersecurity operations, where you get your alerts on this specific assets and show that this is connected to your critical assets. Do that and gather the evidence. Maybe even test it just to showcase it. It's always a good idea to, when you perform your security testing, you do that as let's say the red team, if you know Tiber, but you're the ones attacking, and then you have your blue team. While you are under attack as a blue team, make sure you gather the evidence for when you discover different attacks. That's really good from a security operations point of view. If you think security operations is also the things that you do in a cyber defense center or security operations center. What tools or processes have been most effective in monitoring and maintaining compliance with DORA? So that's a good one. What tools have been most effective in monitoring and maintaining compliance with DORA? I know there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to build a tool to show this. I would say that Excel is good. Why not? So it's quite simple. You have a line, either you're compliant or you're not. So that's a really simple thing to do, and you can get that done by the 17th of January. So use an Excel to do that. And then again, as I mentioned before, when you go into the process of doing this, remember to, if you work with audit and you know this, then gather the evidence, make links from Excel. Why not make an Excel sheet with a link to where the evidence is? That's a very simple way to get about it. You can also get into ISMS tools and different everything, but be pragmatic about it. Read the articles, make a list of all the articles and everything, figure out where you have the evidence and take them from the top. So effective, yeah. So, and you can, your process around it, you should of course have in your compliance policies and everything that you need to review these different requirements, so that your compliance office or the first line of defense who's doing this should use this Excel sheet to go through these requirements step by step. Yeah. Course of action in case identified non-compliance cannot be resolved before deadline. For example, network segmentation, which requires reconstruction and is dependent on legacy applications. Any good real life examples or experience? Yeah, that's really, I can feel the pain because I'm thinking about many people that has struggled with network segmentation for many years, and it's a huge task. I would say that the idea of, so you have your strategy, you have your policies. So go in and make a strategy on how you want to do with your network segmentation. So make a plan, make a strategy for it. I know it sounds really not that concrete, but do that. Make a policy that describes you need to have it, and to then describe how, even set aside money for it, do the project, document the things that you want to do. So you do the things that you need to do for planning it, and you allocate resources for it, and you document that this is something that you're going to do, and then start working on it. We can't fix everything. So, but if you just say, well, we're not able to do it, it's the same story. Go in, make a strategy, make a plan, do a project, make sure your policies are describing this, make sure that your processes are describing it, and also how you set it up if you even want to do SOPs for it later on. And do one example of a network segmentation in some way or some area of your infrastructure. So do one network segmentation so you showcase that you can do it. You won't be able to fix everything. I know that it's more or less impossible, but do that, do the evidence for that one, and have that in place. You could argue that you might end up in a situation where the auditors will not talk about anything other than the things that you show. Of course, that's not the optimal way of doing it. You want to do it all the way around, and you want to be compliant all the way around. Understand that, but do it for one, and do it all through the way. Gather your evidence, and then plan the rest. Yeah. So we got a little more here. How mandatory DORA for government organizations, for example, CERT or Ministry of Justice? How for government? So DORA, this is a good question. I think it's related to the fact that maybe you're thinking about how government organizations should apply it to DORA. I'm thinking in what case that could be relevant, let's say. I think that you CERTs or ministries of justice, you could even say some of the national banks, looking at those as well. But they are, in a sense, I know the National Bank of Denmark is not do not have the same requirements as you have in the financial sector per se, because they're a government organization. So I can't answer the question because I don't know if there's something specific. Article 124, go in and read that one and see if any of the government organizations are directly mentioned. That's one thing. The other thing is that you might be the third party. So if you are the third party for that one, you might be affected off DORA because of that. So if you are, let's say, NF-CERT, I don't know if that's a public or private or it's a governmental organization. I don't know that. But anyways, if you're a third party vendor to a financial institution that needs to comply with DORA, there might be some things you need to look into from that point of view. I don't know the exact question, or sorry, the right answer for that one.
Thank you so much.